Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and today we are going to discuss who are the most important players on the San Francisco 49ers. And yes, look, we are going to try to dwindle down a 90-man roster to a 75-man roster to a 53-man roster and just bring it all the way down and try to figure out which four San Francisco 49ers players define the team. Here are some rules we have going into, I guess you can say, our reconstruction of how we define those four players. One is there is going to be no coaches. So I'm sorry, Kyle Shanahan stands out there. We are not going to use Kyle Shanahan. He's not allowed. And we are only going to be basing this on the last two seasons, 2021 in 2022. No 2019, no 2018, 2020, none of that matters. Only 2021 and 2022. And I think to begin, we have to ask ourselves, how do you quantify important? If you're going to ask, whether you're a listener or a watcher, or just the fan base as a whole, name the four most important San Francisco 49ers players. That's a big question. That's a big, ask of somebody. And so to do so, we have to quantify what important actually means. And I think one is just the stat book, the box score. What do your stats look like? The other is how the team played with you and without you. The third thing is your personal performance. Sometimes stats don't always tell the entire story. Look at the Eagles game or the game against the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. There's actually a lot of good performances in that game from certain players, but because the box score says otherwise, you wouldn't know that. Or many games along the way. The Dallas Cowboys game, in the playoffs, the Seattle Seahawks game, even the Saints game where it was 13-0, that was a good game for a handful of players. What was your personal performance? And finally, clutch. How clutch were you? How many big moments have you had? Important moments that either propel this team to a win or extend this team's lead. Maybe it was a big turnover. Talanoa Hufanga, Monday Night Football against the Rams. How many big plays did you have? And so, again, taking a 90-man roster to 75, 53, all the way down to four players is a tough ask. And so if we're going to quantify important, those four things: clutch, personal performance, stat sheet, and how the team performed with or without you. The other thing we have to dive into is, look, this team is stacked with talent. We cannot pick every single player that we say might be the best at their position or just a really good player in general. So I do have my honorable mentions. You can disagree here. I want you at home to ask yourself, again, who are the four most important 49ers? I'm sure we are going to disagree on this because I like to think I have the perfect list, but I'm sure you think you have the perfect four as well. And so let's give guys some kudos that deserve some credit here that maybe could be in this conversation, but, truly aren't. They're really good players. They're great players. Some of these guys are all pro and Pro Bowl type players, but these aren't really those four cornerstone, those four pillars of the San Francisco 49ers that I have chosen and we'll kind of dive into here in a second. So my number one honorable mention is Kyle Juszczyk. There's a reason why every single time it feels like, it's a fullback. Who cares? The fullback lives on in Kyle Juszczyk for a reason. He is the Swiss Army knife of the offense. He can do it all. He can block. He can receive. He can even be a running back. Heck, he might even be this team's emergency quarterback at one point. Kyle Juszczyk can do it all. Kyle Shanahan loves him, brought him in for a reason because he can do everything and almost anything they need him to do. He does a lot of things many fans don't see, things that aren't in, the stat sheet or the box score. I know last year there was a story that he was pointing out plays to Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance at the fullback position. He kind of is that, center number two. He's not playing center, but he's kind of like a center where he's really smart. He went to Harvard, if you didn't know. He really is kind of a, this intellectual leader of the offense that many fans don't know about, or if they know that, they don't appreciate as much as they should, because Kyle Juszczyk means a ton to what this offense likes to do. The other guy really is kind of a newcomer to the scene, and that is Jake Brendel. Now, let's be honest here. You can probably put any center that has played under Kyle Shanahan since 2021, whether it's Alex Mack or Jake Brendel, they would have been on this list in some form or fashion. Jake Brendel just happens to actually be on the team still. But Jake Brendel, being kind of this player that many fans wrote off or uncertain about, he showed his ability last year to lead this offensive line at center. Didn't miss a step from Mack to Brendel. That was a big concern coming into the year. I think he deserved that second team All-Pro or a Pro Bowl alternate. I think he really deserved that. I think Jake Brendel doesn't get enough credit because of where he comes from. He's a center. No one notices him too much. Like, I know Trent Williams and Aaron Banks are there, but I think Jake Brendel, he really solidified the offensive line, because there were so many question marks last year. Who's playing center? Who's playing right guard? Can McGlinchey, stay healthy and stay upright and be a good pass blocker? And Jake Brendel really filled the shoes of a legend at center that was Alex Mack, and this team did not miss a beat on the offensive line. He was solid all year long and deserves a ton of credit for what the offensive line does, but again, not one of the four most important players on this team. The other guy, they got four more of these things to get through. The other guy is a newcomer, and that's the only reason why he didn't make this list, I believe, is because Javon Hargrave, he could easily make this list next year, but this is 2023, and he hasn't played a snap yet. He could make this list again next year, but you have to play one snap at least to be considered one of the most important players on this team. He should be a great player. He is and was their premier free agent signing, but Javon Hargrave, if you haven't played yet, you can't make the list. Hoping I can add you, though, next year. The other guy is Arik Armstead. I'm going to read you a stat because I know many fans don't like Arik Armstead. I know there's the DeForest Buckner, and you kept Buckner, and you traded Buckner away, and kept Armstead, and instead. I think that debate's over with. Armstead's been really good. Blame Kinlaw for that, not Arik Armstead. He's been solid ever since 2019. And I want to read you a stat right here because it really does prove how important he is to the defense. And this stat alone was almost a reason why I added him to my four most important players on this defense. Arik Armstead, when he returned to the lineup against Miami, when Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt, Arik Armstead returned. And it coincided with San Francisco's defense forcing 16 turnovers in the final 6 games. 16 turnovers to end the season in their final 6 games. In all, 24 of their 30 forced turnovers over the course of the year came when Arik Armstead was active. Now, is he the sole reason because those things happened? By all means, no. But I do think it is a coincidence that when he's on the field, turnovers happen, takeaways happen. Yes, Nick Bosa played, Fred Warner played, other great players made really good plays, but if Arik Armstead's on that field, he may not get sacks, but he does create damage. He gets penetration, he gets pressures, he forces quarterbacks to make mistakes. He's a veteran player. He's a captain of this team in the community as well. I think had Arik Armstead had, maybe a 4 or 5 sack season, he could have made this list as the 4th, player on my top 4 most important Niners list, but he just missed it barely. I really had a hard time with keeping him off the list because he's a veteran player again and has been really good for this team since 2019, including last year on the field for 24 of the team's 30 turnovers. That's a big deal. Do not sleep on Arik Armstead. Other guys like Dre Greenlaw and Mooney Ward, both really good players. Dre Greenlaw is finally getting his kind of credit he's due for playing really good for the past 3 or 4 seasons. He's now becoming a household name in the NFL. Had a great season last year, arguably his best year in the NFL after getting the contract extension. I loved what I saw from him, but let's be honest here, folks. there's a better linebacker on this roster waiting in the wings. Behind him is Mooney Ward, who is this team's #1 cornerback, was phenomenal in man coverage all year long, was locking down #1 receivers all year long, had pick after pick. There was a reason why many teams didn't throw towards him, because he was so freaking good. But when you ask yourself, who are cornerstone players, who are the 4 most important players, I don't think Mooney Ward's in that category just yet. Could he get there? Sure. Right now, not the case. But I know one player that many fans might scoff at because he's a fan favorite, excuse me. He had a phenomenal year last year to begin the season, kind of fell off towards the end. He fits in with the culture San Francisco is building and has built and is trying to carry on as they try to kind of find their quest for 6. And he's a player that is a late round pick. Many fans have kind of come around and said, you're my guy. And he took the place of a veteran safety that many fans also liked here in San Francisco. And that is Talanoa Hufanga. Again, great year last year. I think him falling off towards the end of the year is what keeps him off this list. And unfortunately, he does not play a position that is really valued in the NFL nowadays. Now, if you have a top-end guy, you do. But I think Hufanga still has some growing to do before I can say he's truly in this conversation. I think if you ask me, I think he might be like the 8th most important player on this team. And I can even argue that, and let's be honest here, anyone playing quarterback in the NFL is likely on the team's top 4 most important players. Even if it's Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay or Kyle Trask or whoever it might be that we don't think is that good. Even Sam Darnold. If Sam Darnold is the quarterback of this team at a certain point this year, you can argue he is the most important player on this team simply because he plays the most important position. With that being said, we left Trey Lance and Sam Darnold off the list because 1, Darnold has not played a snap this year, and 2, Trey Lance, we don't know if he's going to play at all, and what he showed last year was not enough. Now, if he shines this year, he shines, but what he did last year was not even close to enough to put him on the top 4 most important players. So let's dive into the true candidates of the most important San Francisco 49ers players. Again, the most important players, who do you think they are? While you ponder that question, I'm going to let you know you can use our promo code 49ers Access, 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com. Save yourself $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek.com. Okay, without further ado, let's dive into, again, the top 4 most important players on the San Francisco 49ers. And we have about, 7 players that make our cut. We got to cut down 3 of them. And let's start at the top with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, 8-1 this year with the record. If you want to count the Eagles game, which I will at certain points, and I won't at certain points, but 8-1 this year, won 8 straight games, 5 games to end the regular season, 2 playoff games, and 1 game in relief of Jimmy Garoppolo. And again, he's a quarterback. He plays the most important position, arguably, in sports. It's hard not to put someone on the list like Brock Purdy playing quarterback. And it's funny because we're in this kind of weird flux where he's hurt right now. He might not start the year as a starting quarterback. Many fans want Trey Lance to start, and all of that was kind of taken into account of, well, if you don't start the year, what does the team look like? And you have to ask yourself, what did this team look like before Brock Purdy, and what did it look like afterwards? And I looked at all of Brock Purdy's stats, and I dove into, had he played the full year, what were his stats going to be? And let me tell you, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. And this is why many fans truly believe in Brock Purdy. So, had Brock Purdy played the full season, 17 games, 18 weeks, he would have had 3,706 passing yards. that would have ranked 10th in the NFL. Mind you, he only played part of the Buccaneers game. They crushed them. 3,706 passing yards, 10th in the NFL, would have ranked ahead of Jalen Hurts, Aaron Rodgers, and Tua Tagovailoa. He also would have had 37 touchdowns that would have ranked second in the NFL and would have had only 8.5 interceptions, around there, 8 or 9 interceptions, which would have ranked 21st. It's, just put it bluntly, Brock Purdy, had he played the full year on the pace he was playing at, would have likely been an MVP candidate. That sounds crass and weird to say, but that's true. Now, again, played 8 games, started 8 games, played 9 games. Like, you can make the case he played, kind of half of the year, but the pace he was on was MVP-esque. Many stats show him better than Mahomes and some of the top tier guys. Obviously, is not Patrick Mahomes. We know this, but on the pace he was on, you could make an argument that he should be in this top 4. The Niners only had 3 games over 30 points before Brock Purdy became the quarterback. Insane. With Brock Purdy at quarterback, they scored the most points they had all year, 41, and scored at least 33 points in all of 1 Brock Purdy starts, which includes the Dolphins game. In 7 games that Brock Purdy finished, George Kittle had 425 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. So what I mean by that is Brock Purdy took this team to new heights in the box score, on the scoreboard, and also improved players around him. We did see a resurgence of George Kittle, which, if you're making players better around you, how does that not get you into this conversation or make you a cemented piece of the top 4 most important San Francisco 49ers? And I'm going to tell you why right now. The reason Brock Purdy is not in my top 4 most important San Francisco 49ers is because the player that came in just before him, to me, edges him out as the most important 49er and kind of puts us on this track of players that played all year long, were impactful all year long, and arguably, and kind of weirdly, had a bigger impact on the team for a longer period of time. Had Brock Purdy played the whole year, he would be on this list. But I can argue there are players that came in before him that might have been a bigger reason for the success, not taking anything away from him, but the player I'm going to list next, and you probably know his name already, he is the number 1 player on our top 4 most important players on the San Francisco 49ers. His name is Christian McCaffrey. So it's funny because when Christian McCaffrey came in, this team was near the trade deadline, kind of sitting there floating around like, what's this team going to be? We're 4-4. How are we going to survive? This team kind of feels like it's just kind of a lame duck in the pond. They should be better than they're playing, but they're 4-4. They're kind of, every game seems like a fight to the end. They're making dumb mistakes, and all of a sudden, the fuse got lit, and Christian McCaffrey ran through and got shot out of the cannonball and became this team's firecracker and fire starter. The Niners, 12-1 with Christian McCaffrey as a starter, 12-1, the one loss being against Philadelphia. Before Christian McCaffrey got here, and this is one of the reasons why I picked Christian McCaffrey over Brock Purdy, is because before CMC got here, they were 3-3, a 20-8 or 20.8 points per game, 340 yards per game, and a 41% on third down. After Christian McCaffrey got here, 12-1, 28.6 points per game. Without the Philadelphia game, 12-0, 30.5 points per game, 362 yards per game. Without the Philadelphia game, 379 yards per game, and 49% on third down. Folks, Christian McCaffrey really should have been in the MVP conversation last year. I get why he wasn't, but the impact he had, the importance he had on this team was bar none the highest, at least on offense. We'll get to defense in a second here. You already know he's going to be on there, at least one player. But Christian McCaffrey deserves his credit, deserves to be on this list by far over almost every single player you can choose on the San Francisco 49ers. And it's funny because Christian McCaffrey with the San Francisco 49ers, including the playoffs, had 1,543 total yards, 14 touchdowns, including his touchdown pass against the Rams, 64 catches, and 16 plays of 20-plus yards. Again, he's so freaking versatile. Had a game where he had a touchdown playing quarterback, running back, and receiver. He can play slot, out wide, can play running back behind the line of scrimmage. Christian McCaffrey can do it all. He scored a touchdown in 8 straight games, the longest streak of any Niners player since Terrell Owens in 1998. And last season, Patrick Mahomes, only Patrick Mahomes, had a higher EPA per play than Niners quarterbacks when throwing passes of 10 yards or fewer to Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey was arguably as important to this team's success as Patrick Mahomes was to the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. Let's not understate how insane that is. Like, Christian McCaffrey, bar none, is the number one slot, at least offensively, for one of 4 players on the cornerstone, 4 pillars, one of the 4 most important players on the San Francisco 49ers. So no Brock Purdy, but yes to Christian McCaffrey. So who's left? Let's dive into Brandon Ayuk. Does Brandon Ayuk deserve a spot on the top 4 most important players of the San Francisco 49ers? Brandon Ayuk, an ascending player, had his first year of 1,000 receiving yards, was the most targeted player on this team last year, and looked like a clear-cut number 1 receiver. He's a ferocious blocker, and I think the one thing holding me back from Brandon Ayuk is when you think of San Francisco 49ers football, he's not the first person that comes to mind. And it's kind of a cheap thing to think about, but I think of Christian McCaffrey and Brock Purdy and George Kittle and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner and Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel. I don't think of Brandon Ayuk. He had a great year last year. But when you ask yourself, is Brandon Ayuk one of the most important players to this team's success? Yes. But is he a top 4 player? Like, let's put it in perspective here. I could argue that San Francisco needed Deebo Samuel more in 2021 than they needed Brandon Ayuk in 2022. And that's Brandon Ayuk's best year. I know Deebo was awesome, and we'll get to him in a second. But take Brandon Ayuk off of this team. They're a worse team by far, and he was amazing this year. But do I think they could have found some production that may have by no means equaled to, but they could have found something to supplement that role, whether it was Deebo Samuel playing a more wide receiver friendly role, or Juwan Jennings, or McLeod or Gray. I'm not saying they are as good as him. I'm not saying the production would have been even close to Brandon Ayuk. What I'm saying here is that if you plucked Ayuk off of the team, would there be a loss? Yes. Would it be catastrophic? No. Now, that's why there's a conversation happening now of should they actually extend him in a year? And if you have to ask yourself, should a team trying to win a Super Bowl, should they extend arguably their best receiver on the team who's having an amazing OTAs, who had an amazing minicamp, coming off the best year of his career? If you're having that conversation, does that really mean they're one of the 4 most important players to this team's success? I don't think so. This is not a rebuilding team saying, let's trade our best receiver to get high-end draft picks to fill out the roster. This is a team that already has the roster, and people are like, you may be able to kind of find a replacement for him in a year or 2 in the draft. Is it the case? I don't know. We'll find out. But to me, that lends to the conversation being open of, okay, like maybe isn't a top 4 most important player on this team. And I would happen to agree. Brandon Ayuk does not make my list. Great player. Probably the best receiver on this team. I don't think he's a top 4 most important player right now on this roster. And that brings us to Deebo Samuel. Is like when you think of San Francisco 49ers football, what do you think about? Again, Nick Bosa, Christian McCaffrey. I could argue Deebo Samuel is up there with the top players. When you think of San Francisco 49ers football, you think of Deebo Samuel. You think of a tough, ferocious, I want to rip someone's head off. I want to find physical contact. I want to find someone. I want to find my Jalen Ramsey to run through every single Sunday, Monday, and Thursday. Like, I think that's Deebo Samuel. I think that is San Francisco 49ers football. Like, I could argue that Deebo Samuel helped establish the offensive mentality that Kyle Shanahan wants. Like, when Kyle Shanahan got here, he didn't have anybody in 2017. He didn't have anybody in 2018. Dante Pettis sucked, to be blunt about it. But Deebo Samuel was kind of the first player that Kyle Shanahan said, I want that kind of mentality on my offense. I want a, low to the ground, head down, I'm out for blood, every single play, high motor kind of guy. And we've seen Deebo Samuel carry an entire offense really on his shoulders in 2021. He's shown he can be this team's number 1 receiver and number 1 running back in the process. And I get it. 2022 was not his best season. He called it awful himself. Does that knock him down a peg or so? I truly believe it does. If you're not going to put consistent seasons together, you're a one-year wonder. Now, I don't think that's Deebo Samuel, but if you want to be considered one of the most important San Francisco 49ers, you have to string together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. You have to stack seasons, not just days. And I think he's going to be in for a breakout or a bounce back season this year. But when you go from over 2,000 total yards, 16 total touchdowns, seemingly every single big touchdown for a 2-year span, 2019 and 2021 especially, almost every big play was Deebo Samuel. Almost every single, touchdown play or gigantic run or reception with Yak was Deebo Samuel for a full year. Then you fast forward, again, he called it awful, but, kind of a down year for Deebo Samuel. He wasn't the same guy, and kind of when you look at where this season went, it was a great year. We know how it ended. It was awful, but I do think what knocks Deebo Samuel down this metaphorical peg of, off my list of the 4 most important players of the San Francisco 49ers is actually the first player I put on my list is Christian McCaffrey. And I'm going to read you some stats here, and these stats may seem minuscule, but when I tell you the season total differences, I do think it matters. And let's not forget, let's add some context. Deebo was hurt a little bit this year. We saw him on the Buccaneers game, got hurt early. It seemed like it was the end of his season. He came back. He was a dog, got back out there. But he even said, I came in out of shape. It was an awful season for me last year. He said, I don't want to put anything like my 2022 season on tape ever again. If he thinks his season was that bad, which I don't think it was that bad, but if he does, and I think his stats would lean towards it being a down year or at least a mediocre season for Deebo Samuel, can you truly put him on the list? And with the acquisition of Christian McCaffrey, there was a dip in production, a dip in, statistical, highs for Deebo Samuel. Targets with Christian McCaffrey on the field, 7.4 to 7.8 without him. That's not that big of a difference, only 0.4, basically a half of a reception or target. Receiving yards, though, it gets a little tricky. 53.1 receiving yards with Christian McCaffrey, 57.5 without him. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal. 4.4 yards. Like, what are we doing here, right? But that's 902 yards to 977 yards with those averaged out the entirety of 17 games. That's a game and a half difference with and without Christian McCaffrey on the field. That means something. He had 0.3 touchdowns per game with Christian McCaffrey on the field, 0.5 without him. Again, Sterling, it's 0.2 touchdowns. That's 5 touchdowns compared to 8 touchdowns. Ask anybody in football. Would you rather have 5 touchdowns or 8 touchdowns? That's 3 touchdowns. That's 18 points. That's a lot of points. That can change the entirety of the game. And I get it. It's semantics here. But going even further, what is a huge element of Deebo Samuel's game? Running the football. It makes him more dynamic, right? 14 rushing yards with Christian McCaffrey, 23 yards without him. That's 238 yards compared to 400 yards. I do think Christian McCaffrey, well, not a lot, by very little, but enough to push Deebo Samuel off of the most, top 4 most important players on the San Francisco 49ers, which brings us to, I believe, our second player to make our list, and that is George Kittle. I know George Kittle has kind of found himself in this weird, he's not Travis Kelce, but he kind of finds himself always putting up really good seasons, whether it's in the box score or just in general. I think most fans would have him top 3 in the league right now. I put him at number 2 behind Kelce. And there was a certain time where many fans, including myself, would say he's number 1. He can block, he can receive, he can do so many things that Kelce can't, but what Kelce does so well is the best in football, arguably. That propels him higher. But George Kittle, 2 straight Pro Bowls, and All-Pro this last year. He averaged 65 receptions and almost 840 yards and nearly 9 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. Like, you wouldn't know that. Like, George Kittle seems to kind of be this big stat getter, but is always somewhat forgotten, which is funny because he is primarily this team's tempo setter. He does so much media for the team. Like, his face is constantly in front of our TVs and our phones. Like, whether it's, NFL Network, ESPN, or YouTube, whatever you're like watching him on, he's on a lot. We see George Kittle a lot. He's one of the more, fans find themselves in him more. They can connect with him more. He's goofy. He's funny. He's kind of this fan favorite type of player because, one, he's good on the field, but he's so kind and he's funny. He likes to have fun off the field, and he makes fans feel like they're part of something. He makes, jokes, and he's laughing and he's having a good time. He makes the game fun just for us watching the games. And I think, like, when you look at him last year, there did seem to kind of be a point that he was hurt early. Fans were like, how do you get hurt during practice? Like, you are costing us games early, and these games matter. But the way he came on late in the season, I think makes up for any stretch of the year that he may have kind of disappeared. Now, with Lance, who's kind of a non-factor, didn't play really in any of the games Lance played in last year at all. But even in 2021, like, there was a certain time in the year he kind of disappeared. And you're like, hello, where's George Kittle? But this year, that was in the middle of the year where it was like, hey, like, where is George Kittle? Now, you can excuse trying to find his footing again and back on the field after missing 2 games. But when Brock Purdy became the quarterback, it was night and day. To end the season, he had 9 touchdowns in his last 4 games, had 11 touchdowns, a single season high for him. And I think in the last 2 years, to me, a very small difference, but a big difference, you might say, is when he's on the field, this team is 21-8, and when he's not there, they're 2-3. It's almost 500. Does it mean much? Not really. But when you are 21-8 with that, that's with Jimmy G and Trey Lance, then again Trey Lance, then Jimmy G, then Brock Purdy. Like, George Kittle has always seemed to put up points and stats and the box score and make himself look good and still be a cornerstone piece for this team, no matter the quarterback, no matter the situation he's in. And I think we may have seen, I know in 2018, a crazy year, set single season highs in the NFL for records. That got beat out actually later on, but I might add. But I think we saw the best George Kittle we ever saw to end the 2022 season. And whether it's Brock Purdy or Lance this year, if it is Brock Purdy and that chemistry continues, if he had 9 touchdowns with Brock Purdy, I'm not saying he's going to have 18 or 20, but like we're looking at a potential if Brock Purdy's healthy. The chemistry is at an all-time high. Like, I think George Kittle just makes the offense flow. He's an amazing blocker. He's a team-first player. He just wants to play football. And again, he was a culture builder. He's been here since 2017. He's been here since the beginning of time under Kyle Shanahan. And when you watch George Kittle play, your mind goes to, he is, if not the, one of the most important players on this team. And he makes this list. It's Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle thus far for me. But the next guy just missed the cut, and I feel so bad because this player is the best player arguably in the entire NFL. He plays a position that doesn't get too much credit. He was PFF's highest rated player ever. Like this man, this behemoth, this silverback of a man doesn't make my list, but my goodness, I want to punch myself in the face for not putting him on my list because he's so good, and you can find every reason why he should be on here. Highest graded tackle each of the last 3 seasons per PFF, had the second lowest pressures allowed amongst tackles in 2022 with 12, and including the playoffs, had 526 pass blocking snaps, allowed 19 pressures, and just 3 were quarterback hits or a sack, and was this past year's #1 run blocker at 97.7 per PFF. I mean, enough cannot be said. He's a future Hall of Famer. Trent Williams is a gentle giant, but the scariest man ever. He's well respected. He means so much to what this team wants to do. But when like trying to grind out the top four guys, like if there was a 5th person, I think he'd be on this list by far. But when you're talking about 4 cornerstone, 4 most important players, I think he has to get that final cut of being the 5th most important player, not the 4th. And that brings us to defense. To recap, Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle make the list. No Purdy, no Ayuk, no Debo, and painfully, no Trent Williams. Okay, we're going to defense now, folks. And again, no Hufanga, no Greenlaw, no Armstead, no Mooney Ward. We're going to our final 2. Who are the final 2 most important players on this Niners team? I think one of them is easy. Both are probably easy. That's kind of a given at this point. But Nick Bosa, the reigning defensive player of the year, 34 sacks over the last 2 seasons. The team had 44 sacks this past year. He had 18.5. He had 42% of this team's sack total. Almost half of the team's sacks. He had 90 pressures this year. He was an instant impact since drafted in 2019. Came back off the injury in 2021. Should have got comeback player of the year. I mean, it's Nick freaking Bosa. Former number 2 overall pick. Again, it's Nick freaking Bosa. I could argue he is this team's defensive identity. I think offensively it gets kind of muddy because they have so many weapons. Where on defense, it kind of feels like it's Nick Bosa on that defensive line than everybody else. Now, I know Eric Armstead had a good year last year in 2019 and in 2021, but even Javon Hargrave's here now who can have a huge impact, but it really does and has felt like it's Nick Bosa and everybody else. And Myles Garrett's out there, Micah Parsons is out there, but like he is shown to be better than the elite players at his position. He's been clutch in so many big moments. Like the shrug is now iconic because of Nick Bosa and Michael Jordan per se, but like when you think of Nick Bosa, I think of an icon. He's a living, breathing icon. He's going to get extended. He's going to be the highest paid player ever at his position. Set records for a reason. That wasn't Debo. That wasn't Ayuk. Like, that's Nick Bosa. There's a reason that they're making it a point to, like, look, you ain't playing on your fifth-year option. We're going to extend you. Like, you work out wherever you want to work out. You are Nick Bosa. He's been so important to this defense last year and every year, matter of fact. But, like, when you think of Nick Bosa, you think of a one-man wrecking crew. You get the double and triple team this man. He was the most double team player of all last year. And he still had 18.5 sacks, still had 90 pressures. Like, you cannot escape Nick Bosa. He wants to sack quarterbacks. Football just lives and breathes in his lungs and in his blood. It flows through his veins, in his giant quads and biceps. Like, football is Nick Bosa, and Nick Bosa is football. And right now, this defense is Nick Bosa, and Nick Bosa has been this defense. He is the third player, and I could argue should be the most important player on this Niners team, but he's our third of four most important San Francisco 49er players. And our final player, I think at this point you should go, well, duh, of course it's that guy, because why wouldn't it be this man? He is a man I have called a lion hunting for his prey on defense. You've seen the play of him against the Rams, running all the way across the field and diving on the offensive player like a lion hunting his prey. It is Fred Warner. And look, I know I said I wasn't going to look at 2018 and 2017 and 2019 and 2020, but I think with Fred Warner we can make the exception because he's been a game changer since 2018. Since the moment they drafted him in the third round, he was outplaying first-round picks. He was immediately a starting linebacker for this team. And look, there was a stat earlier this year that said since 2018, the Niners defense has allowed the fewest attempts, 134, completions, 71, and yards, just over 1,300 over the middle of the field since in the last 5 years. Like, Fred Warner has essentially eliminated an entire portion of the field for opposing offenses. How many players can you say have done that in the NFL? Nick Bosa maybe takes away one side of the defensive line and offensive line. Fred Warner takes away an entire area and says, look, if you want to throw here, you are going to pay for it. And if you try to throw here, you are going to be highly unsuccessful. The other thing, he is one of the best coverage players in football. Almost half of his career targets, 49%, have come against receivers, the highest rate of any linebacker over that span, and 1.5 times the linebacking average of 33%. What that means is Fred Warner's covering receivers, not tight ends, not running backs. He's locking down receivers, slot guys, big, tall, out wide guys. Like, Fred Warner truly is the best coverage linebacker in football. He is a lockdown coverage linebacker, has amazing ball skills, and has allowed, get this, has allowed negative 9.6 receptions over the expected this past year. Second fewest among linebackers. He's finished 5th, top 5, amongst linebackers in receptions over expected in the past 4 of 5 seasons. Again, Fred Warner is a lockdown coverage linebacker with amazing ball skills, a knack to force fumbles, a true leader, an example of what this Niners team is. Like, doing this list, it was when you go into a room and you're a defense or you're an offense, what are the names you circle? Yeah, you might point out Deebo Samuel, got to stop that guy, right? Got to stop Ayuk. And every team's a little different, but almost every team, every game, every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and sometimes on Saturday, the people who are going to have their name circled, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa. Don't go near those guys. Don't throw it near those guys. Offensively, Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle. Got to stop those guys. Don't let those guys touch the football. Again, this list was so hard to compile. It was so tough to say, I'm sorry, Brandon Ayuk had a great year last year, but it just wasn't good enough to make the top 4 most important San Francisco 49ers. Deebo Samuel, I love you. You are Deebo Samuel. But 2022 knocks you down a peg a little bit, and Christian McCaffrey's emergence in the offense and just amazing record-setting play pushes you down somewhat and props him up a little more than you. Trent Williams. I'm sorry, Trent. I love you to death. You're the best left tackle in football. You're a future Hall of Famer, but right now I don't know if you are the 4th most important Niner. You're number 5, I promise. Just not number 4. And so many rising stars. Hufanga, right? Ayuk, Mooney Ward, Dre Greenlaw. Like, this team is stacked with talent, and to dwindle it down, to shrink it down to all the way down to 4 players. I think Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Nick Bosa, and Fred Warner are the 4 most important players on the San Francisco 49ers since 2021 and heading into the 2023-2024 NFL season. Down below in the comments, tell me your top 4. Do you disagree? Do you agree with me? Tell me why you agree. Tell me why you disagree with me. Tell me where I went right, where I went wrong. If you aren't on YouTube and you're listening on the audio, on the podcast, on Spotify or Apple, hit me up on social media. Instagram, 49ers.access. Twitter, 49ers_access. Hit me up on there. Let's have a conversation about this stuff. Finally, you can also use our promo code 49ersaccess, 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com. Save yourself $20 off your first purchase. You can also use our Fanatics link up in the corner if you're watching on YouTube, or in the description down below. Buy some merch, support the show in the meantime. That being said, my name is Sterling Bennett. This has been the 49er Access Podcast. And until next time, stay faithful.